A white millionaire like Brittany Cole was never supposed to be back in her skyscraper office at 11:47 p.m. But the moment she pushed the door open, her breath froze. A black night shift worker, Darius, sat calmly in her 9,000-letter chair, typing on her personal computer. Her eyes widened. "What do you think you're doing in my office?" Her voice cracked with rage, the kind that comes from entitlement, money, and a lifetime of nobody daring to challenge her. But he didn't flinch, didn't stand, didn't panic. He just looked at her with quiet, steady gaze that made her heartbeat stumble. Brittany stepped closer, heels striking the marble floor. "You people never learn your place." Darius turned the screen toward her, her face drained of color. If this already made your blood boil, hit like and subscribe right now, because stories like this are still happening and the world needs to hear them. Brittany's mouth tightened as she tried to regain her composure. "Get away from my computer." Darius finally leaned back, folding his hands with calm that made her even angrier. "You weren't supposed to be here this late," he said softly. His tone wasn't disrespectful, but wasn't submissive either. It was something worse for her. Controlled, confident, and that terrified her. She snatched the mouse, eyes scanning the spreadsheet he had opened. Her voice broke. How'd you access this?" Darius didn't answer. He simply stood up, adjusted his cleaning gloves, and stepped aside like a man who knew exactly what he was doing. "I clean this place every night," he said quietly, long enough to notice things others ignore. Brittany's hands trembled as she minimized one file, then another. Offshore accounts, quiet transfers, old passwords she thought no one ever saw her type. Her throat tightened. She tried to speak, but the words wouldn't come. Darius walked toward the door, stopping just long enough to say one line, a line that made her knees nearly buckle. "You really shouldn't underestimate the people you think can't see you." And then he left her standing there, shaking in an office full of secrets she thought would stay buried forever. Brittany Cole had always treated the office like her personal kingdom, and in that kingdom, workers like Darius were nothing more than background noise, bodies that moved quietly, cleaned quietly, and existed quietly. At least, that's what she believed. 3 months before that late-night confrontation, the pattern had already begun. Every morning, when the executives walked in, Brittany would breeze past Darius with her usual dismissive glance, the kind people get as someone they don't consider human enough to greet. He would nod politely. She never nodded back. One Thursday afternoon, the disrespect escalated. Darius was cleaning the long conference table while Brittany prepared for a meeting with her investors. A pen rolled toward him. He reached to pick it up. She snapped, "Don't touch anything unless I tell you." "God, can't you workers follow simple instructions?" The room fell silent. Executives shifted uncomfortably. Darius lowered his eyes and stepped back. But inside, something shifted. Not fear, not anger, but awareness. As days passed, she found new ways to remind him of the gap she believed existed between them. If he walked down the hallway, she'd clench her purse closer. If he passed her office, she'd shut the door mid-sentence. If he was wiping a window, she would mutter, "Do it again." You missed a spot, even when the glass was spotless. Yet Darius never reacted. He maintained the same calm expression, the kind that irritated her more than if he had argued back. She needed fear. She needed obedience. She needed him to shrink. But he never did. What she didn't see was that Darius was always watching. Not in the way she imagined. Not waiting for revenge, not plotting chaos, but collecting the little truths people like her left behind. Passwords typed too loudly. Phone calls made too boldly. Documents left open too casually. People like Brittany believed power protected them from consequences. But sometimes power blinds. Late one evening, as she complained on phone about ungrateful employees, Darius quietly emptied her trash bin and noticed shredded documents with numbers that didn't match the financial reports he'd overheard earlier. He didn't touch them. He didn't need to. He just observed. And he remembered. In her arrogance, Brittany assumed he never understood anything she said around him. But in reality, he understood everything, far more than she ever imagined. by the time she humiliated him in front of her investors. Darius already knew something was deeply wrong inside her empire, and she had no idea the man she kept trying to belittle was slowly becoming the one person she should have feared most. The next morning, Darius was sweeping the lobby when he noticed two security guards watching him a little too closely. Moments later, the HR director, Ella Grant, stepped out of her glass office and called his name with a forced smile, the kind people wear when they're about to do something they don't want to admit. "Darius, can you come with me for a moment?" He followed her quietly. No fear, no confusion, just calm, and that calmness unsettled her more than anything else. If this happened right in front of you, what would you do? Tell me in the comments. I read every one. And if you want justice as much as I do, hit subscribe. Inside the small HR room, Ella closed the blinds before turning toward him. Her voice trembled. "Look, I don't know what happened between you and Ms. Cole, but she's demanding that we let you go today." Darius raised an eyebrow, but said nothing. Ella swallowed hard. "She claims there were behavior concerns. We both know that's not true," he replied calmly. Ella nodded. "I know. Your record is spotless. Not a single complaint in 3 years." She hesitated, lowering her voice. "And between us, this feels personal. Very personal." She expected him to plead, panic, defend himself, do anything a man afraid of losing his job would do. But he just sat back, hands relaxed. "Is she here?" he asked. Ella blinked. "Yes." "She came in early." Darius nodded slowly, as if that detail completed a puzzle piece in his mind. That was the moment Ella realized something was off. Not about him, but about the entire situation. "Darius," she whispered, "you're taking this unusually well." He looked up, his expression unreadable. People make their choices, and every choice has a consequence. She felt a chill run through her. Meanwhile, upstairs, Brittany paced her office with her phone pressed to her ear. "I don't care what you have to do," she snapped at her head of security. "I want him gone. Today. I don't want him working anywhere in this building ever again. Make it happen." Her voice cracked not with anger, but fear. A fear she didn't understand yet, but could feel creeping closer. Back in HR, Ella slid a termination form across the table, her hand shaking. But Darius didn't touch it. Instead, he leaned in slightly. "Ella, has Miss Cole ever mentioned why she suddenly wants me gone?" Ella shook her head. "Because she's scared," he said quietly. "And scared people make desperate decisions." Ella's breath caught. What exactly does she think you know? Darius stood up, adjusted his cleaning gloves, and answered without hesitation. "Enough." That afternoon, while Brittany raged upstairs and HR scrambled to follow her orders, Darius stepped out of the building as if nothing unusual had happened. But the moment he turned the corner, his entire posture shifted, calm to calculated, because for 6 quiet months, he hadn't just been cleaning hallways. He had been documenting everything. And today was the day all those pieces finally connected. If you believe this should never happen again, share this now. And to my USA, UK, and Canadian viewers, your voice is power. Use it. Darius walked into a small, old-fashioned coffee shop across the street. The barista gave him a nod. He came here often, always sitting at the same dimly lit table in the back. 5 minutes later, a man lowered himself into the seat across from him. Not a friend, not a co-worker. Someone Brittany Cole would have never imagined. Darius. The man greeted quietly. It was James Holloway, a retired financial crimes investigator who now freelanced with journalists and nonprofits. "You said you had something important." Darius slid a small black USB drive across the table. "No names yet," he said. "Just truth." James plugged it into his tablet. Within seconds, his eyes widened. He scrolled, stopped, scrolled again. "What? How did you even get access to this?" Darius answered calmly. "Rich people get comfortable. Comfortable people get sloppy." James leaned back, stunned. "These are documented transfers, unreported assets, bid rigging contracts. This alone is enough for federal attention." "There's more!" Darius replied. Recordings, screenshots, emails she left open at night, passwords she typed without thinking. James stared at him. You're not a cleaner, are you? Darius shook his head. I dropped out of my accounting program when my mother got sick. I never went back, but I didn't forget anything I learned. James exhaled slowly. You've basically done the work of an entire auditing team. Darius gave a small, controlled smile. I had time. For the first time, someone looked at him not with pity but with respect. Real, earned respect. James closed the tablet. If you want to report this, I have contacts. Government, media, watchdog groups. People who don't look away. Darius nodded. Good, because she's trying to fire me. And once she does, there's no conflict of interest. Everything becomes legally clean. James froze. You're telling me you let her make the first move? Darius looked out the window toward the towering corporate building. She always would. People like her can't help exposing themselves. James shook his head in disbelief. This is bigger than personal revenge. Do you understand what you're about to unleash? Darius's voice didn't waver. I'm not trying to destroy her. I'm trying to stop what she's been doing for years, what she thinks no one else can see. He placed his hands on the table, steady and certain. She treated me like I was invisible. He paused. But invisible people hear everything. And sometimes that's all you need. Outside the coffee shop window, Brittany Cole stormed through her lobby, barking orders, unaware that the first domino had already fallen. The next morning, the building didn't feel like the same place. Executives moved nervously in the hallways. Assistants whispered in corners. Phones rang nonstop. Something heavy hung in the air, something Brittany Cole didn't yet understand. At 9:14 a.m., it finally hit. 3 dark SUVs pulled up in front of the main entrance. Agents stepped out, badges visible, expressions cold and official. Within minutes, they were in the lobby asking for access to financial records, internal emails, and executive devices. People stopped and stared. Whispers turned into panic. On the 28th floor, Brittany's assistant burst into her office. MMS Cole, federal agents are here. Brittany spun around. For what? They said it's regarding financial irregularities. Her face tightened. That's impossible. Who filed something like that? Her assistant swallowed. They said the evidence was extensive. Downstairs, agents moved through floors collecting hard drives, file boxes, email logs. IT staff looked terrified. Managers tried to ask questions or were told, "We cannot discuss active investigations." Videos taken by employees started circulating on social media within minutes. Something big is happening at Coal Industries. Federal investigators just walked in. Is the CEO in trouble? On the 32nd floor, board members held an emergency meeting. No one smiled. No one defended her. Everyone had the same look. The look of people realizing they might be sinking because of someone else's actions. Meanwhile, Brittany stormed down to the lobby. Who authorized this? She demanded. One agent turned to her. Ma'am, we have warrants for a full audit and document retrieval. Please step aside. Brittany's face flushed red. I am the CEO, which is exactly why we need you to comply. Her hands shook as she stepped back. For the first time in her life, she wasn't in control. Minutes later, her phone buzzed nonstop. News alerts, stock market drops, investor messages, angry emails. Her company's share price had plummeted in less than an hour. And in the quiet chaos of the lobby, someone noticed a trending headline. Anonymous whistleblower provides damning evidence against Coal Industries. Employees began speculating. Who had access to all that? Someone must have been watching for a long time. Did she anger the wrong person? But while everyone else panicked, Darius walked into front doors with his cleaning bag slung over his shoulder, moving the same calm way he always did. Security guards looked confused. Other employees stared. But Darius didn't acknowledge anyone. He just walked past the chaos, past the agents, past the fear, and Brittany saw him. For the first time, her arrogance cracked into something real, recognition, then dread, because she finally understood exactly who had been watching her all along. By noon, Cole Industries was no longer a powerhouse. It was a collapsing tower, and Brittany Cole was at the center of the storm. The board summoned her to an urgent meeting. She walked in expecting support, excuses, protection, the privileges she counted on her whole life. But the room was silent, cold, unforgiving. The chairman slid a stack of printed emails across the table. "Ms. Cole, would you like to explain these?" Brittany skimmed the pages and felt her stomach drop. Transfers she thought were buried. Internal messages she assumed no one could ever retrieve. Contracts she pushed through without oversight. Everything, laid out in black and white. "That evidence didn't come from us," the chairman said sharply. "It came from a whistleblower, and it's already with federal investigators." Her voice cracked. Who had access to this?" Another board member replied, "Someone who watched you closely for years." Her hands clenched at her sides. Before she could speak, the chairman continued, "Your actions have caused a 62 stock crash, 3 federal investigations, and irreversible public damage. We can't shield you." "You're firing me?" she gasped. "We're removing you," he corrected. "Effective immediately." Security entered the room, not with cruelty, but with finality. They handed her a small box. "Please gather your personal items." Brittany's throat tightened as she walked back to her office for the last time. Executives avoided her eyes. Assistant pretended to type. The woman who once commanded entire floors now walked like a ghost through halls she no longer owned. Inside her office, she placed her awards and designer pens into the box. Hands shaking, breath unsteady, panic rising. Then she looked out the window. Across the street, employees, reporters, and onlookers had gathered. And standing near the sidewalk, talking calmly to an agent, was Darius. No fear, no rush, just the steady presence of someone who knew the truth would eventually catch up. Brittany felt the final blow when a breaking news banner flashed on her phone. Whistleblower was targeted retaliation by CEO. Records reveal. Dismissal of black workers sparks national conversation on racism in corporate America. Her knees weakened. Retaliation, racism, corruption, all tied to her name. By the time she reached the building's exit, cameras were waiting. Her face flooded every screen. She hid behind her box, shielding herself from the reporters' questions. Questions she no longer had the power to silence. And as she stepped into the harsh daylight, one truth settled over her like a weight she could never escape. The empire she built wasn't taken from her. She had handed it away, piece by piece, to the very man she tried to destroy. Brittany didn't go home that day. She wandered the city instead, gripping the small cardboard box of her belongings as if it were the last piece of her old life she could still control. But the truth followed her everywhere, on phone screens, on news banners, in the whispers of pedestrians who recognized her from the viral clips. By sunset, she finally returned to her penthouse, now half empty after the frozen accounts and asset seizures. She sank onto the couch, scrolling through endless headlines tearing apart her legacy. Every one of them mentioned the same name, Darius. She tossed the phone aside, shaking. "How did this happen?" she whispered to no one. Across the city, Darius stepped into a modest office building, not as a cleaner this time, but as a consultant working with investigators and advocacy groups. He greeted the receptionist politely, placed his bag down, and began reviewing documents tied to corporate fraud cases from other companies. Real work, work that mattered. What surprised everyone was how quietly he carried himself. No bragging, no interviews, no celebration. He wasn't trying to be a hero. He was simply doing what he always did, moving with purpose, listening more than he spoke, and seeing what others overlooked. A week later, fate brought them face to face again. Not in a boardroom, not in an office, but in a grocery store aisle on a quiet Tuesday morning. Brittany froze when she saw him. Her instinct was to hide, to turn away, to escape the shame burning in her chest. But he had already noticed her. Darius nodded politely. "Ms. Cole." She swallowed hard. I didn't expect to see you." He gave a calm, steady smile, the same one he had on the night everything changed. "I hope you're doing all right." No anger, no triumph, no gloating, just dignity. And somehow, that made her feel even smaller. She opened her mouth, searching for an apology, but no words came out, so he spared her the struggle. "Take care," he said gently before walking away. As she watched him leave, the truth settled in her chest with a painful clarity. He hadn't ruined her life. She had done that herself. He simply refused to stay silent. And in the quiet of that grocery aisle, Brittany finally understood something she had never allowed herself to see. Respect isn't demanded, it's earned. And she had lost hers long before the world found out the truth.